the dream that turned into a nightmare. It was 1957 and the Ford Motor Company stood at the top of the American car market. The highways were booming, families were growing, and people wanted cars that reflected their success. Ford believed it had the perfect answer, a brand new car line that would fill the gap between its mid-priced Fords and the luxury Lincolns. The name chosen was Edsel after Henry Ford's only son. It was supposed to be a tribute, a symbol of pride and a vision of the future. But instead, it became one of the greatest failures in automotive history. The story begins with excitement. Ford spent nearly 10 years planning the Edsel. Executives wanted to design something revolutionary, something that would make people feel like they were buying the future. They studied market research, looked at consumer trends, and poured money into the project. The car wasn't just a product, it was meant to be a statement. Ford believed this vehicle would dominate the midsize market. In total, Ford invested around $250 million, equivalent to more than $2 billion today, into the Edsel project. This was no small gamble. It was the kind of decision that could either push Ford years ahead of the competition or drag it dangerously close to collapse. Unfortunately, it would be the latter. The car's design was unlike anything people had seen. Its most infamous feature was the vertical oval grille at the front, which some critics compared to a horse collar or even worse. Instead of looking futuristic, it looked odd. The styling didn't connect with the average buyer. Many people who first saw it were puzzled rather than impressed. But design wasn't the only problem. The Edsel's release was hyped beyond imagination. Ford teased it as the car of the future, building anticipation through massive advertising campaigns. They kept it secret, fueling curiosity, and when the big reveal came in 1957, Americans tuned in to see what all the buzz was about. What they saw was disappointing. Consumers had expected sleek, modern perfection. Instead, they saw a car that was too flashy for some and too awkward for others. Worse, the timing couldn't have been worse. The economy was slipping into recession, and people were looking for affordable, practical vehicles, not bold experiments. The Edsel was priced higher than most families could comfortably afford, landing it in a confusing market space. Reliability issues also haunted the car. Some Edsels left the factory with misaligned parts, leaking fluids and faulty transmissions. Dealers struggled to sell them, and buyers quickly lost confidence. Word spread fast in an age where reputation could make or break a product. By the end of its first year, the Edsel was already in trouble. Ford had expected to sell over 200,000 units, but they barely managed half that number. Instead of being the car that symbolized American progress, it became a running joke. Late-night comedians mocked it, and car critics wrote scathing reviews. But Ford wasn't ready to give up yet. Executives thought the Edsel just needed more time to find its audience. What they didn't realize was that the damage was already done. The name Edsel had become synonymous with failure. And this was only the beginning. The true disaster of the Edsel wasn't just its design flaws or poor timing. It was how deeply it shook Ford as a company, financially, emotionally, and strategically. The $350 million loss would haunt the company for years to come, and the lessons from this failure still echo through business schools and boardrooms today. What exactly went wrong inside Ford? Why did so many smart executives miss the warning signs? And how close did the Edsel come to destroying the entire company? The answers lie in what happened next, as Ford doubled down on a project that was already doomed. When the Edsel officially hit showrooms in late 1957, Ford expected crowds to line up outside dealerships. Executives believed buyers would see the car as a symbol of prestige, something positioned perfectly between the ordinary Ford and the luxurious Lincoln. But instead of excitement, dealerships were filled with confusion. Customers asked one big question: who exactly is this car for? Ford had miscalculated the market. They aimed the Edsel at a middle-income buyer who wanted to climb the social ladder, but they failed to realize that these buyers were actually moving in two directions. Some were saving money by sticking with cheaper models, while others stretched their budgets to buy premium cars like Cadillacs. The Edsel, priced awkwardly in the middle, didn't satisfy either group. Even the name Edsel failed to inspire. Marketing experts had suggested glamorous names like Corsair, Citation, or Panther, but Henry Ford II insisted on honoring his late father. What was meant as a tribute instead sounded old-fashioned. In an era obsessed with space-age names and futuristic designs, Edsel just didn't fit. The launch itself became one of the most expensive marketing campaigns in automotive history. Ford spent tens of millions on ads, including a lavish television special called The Edsel Show starring Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby. But no amount of celebrity endorsement could cover up the truth. The car didn't live up to the hype. Shoppers complained about its quirks. The push-button transmission was placed in the center of the steering wheel, confusing drivers. Some cars rolled off the line with mismatched parts, including trunks that wouldn't close and hoods that didn't align. For a car advertised as futuristic perfection, these flaws were unforgivable. Dealerships, too, felt betrayed. Ford had promised them a gold mine, but many were stuck with cars that wouldn't sell. Some dealers took massive financial hits, with unsold Edsels sitting on lots for months. The public quickly sensed desperation. A car that was supposed to scream luxury and innovation was now being quietly discounted just to get it off the lot. The American economy made matters worse. By 1958, a recession gripped the nation. Families were tightening budgets, unemployment was rising, and people wanted smaller, fuel-efficient, reliable cars. Instead, the Edsel was big, flashy, and expensive. It was everything people didn't need. Still, Ford executives were in denial. They believed the poor sales were just growing pains. They continued to invest heavily in the brand, convinced that buyers would eventually come around. But as the months dragged on, it became clear the Edsel wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing. By the end of its first year, sales were less than half of what Ford had projected. Worse, critics and comedians had turned the Edsel into a punchline. Jokes about the car's grille being compared to a toilet seat or a horse collar spread like wildfire. The name Edsel itself began to symbolize failure. Inside Ford's boardrooms, panic spread. The company had invested hundreds of millions of dollars in research, marketing, and production. Dealers were demanding answers. Shareholders were furious. Every Edsel that rolled off the line represented not hope but loss. The cracks were no longer hidden, they were wide open. The Edsel had failed to connect with the public, failed to deliver on its promises, and failed to justify its enormous cost. But Ford still had one last chance. They believed if they updated the design, fixed the flaws, and doubled down, the car might still turn around. What they didn't realize was that the Edsel was already beyond saving. The damage to its reputation was permanent, and Ford was about to discover just how devastating that damage would become. By 1959, Ford was running out of patience. The Edsel had already cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars, yet sales were collapsing faster than anyone could imagine. Executives who once believed the car would redefine the industry now sat in meetings filled with frustration and disbelief. The Edsel was no longer just a struggling brand, it had become a corporate embarrassment. Ford had introduced multiple models of the Edsel, from the Ranger to the Citation, hoping that variety would boost sales. But variety didn't matter when customers simply didn't want the car. Dealers were forced to slash prices, and many Edsels were sold at a loss. In fact, some were even scrapped directly at dealerships rather than wasting money trying to sell them. The numbers told the story. Ford had predicted sales of 200,000 units in the first year. Instead, barely 64,000 were sold. By 1960, sales dropped to a devastating 2,800 units before Ford pulled the plug entirely, as the car of the future was discontinued in just 3 short years. The total loss, around $350 million, which would equal several billions in today's money. This wasn't just a dent in Ford's profits, it nearly crippled the company. Shareholders were furious, dealers lost faith, and inside the company morale collapsed. The Edsel name was now a scar, something executives rarely wanted to mention again. But perhaps the most painful part of the Edsel story was what it represented. Ford hadn't just built a car, it had built a dream. The Edsel was supposed to honor Henry Ford's son, stand as a legacy, and cement Ford's dominance in the market. Instead, it became a symbol of corporate arrogance, proof that even the biggest companies can fail when they lose touch with their customers. Why did the Edsel fail so badly? Historians point to several reasons. The car was released during a recession, when buyers wanted affordable cars, not flashy experiments. Its design was polarizing, with the infamous grille earning ridicule instead of admiration. The marketing overpromised, building unrealistic expectations that the car could never meet. Quality issues damaged trust at the exact moment when Ford needed perfection. Perhaps the biggest reason, however, was simple: the market didn't need it. Buyers already had choices in the price range the Edsel tried to dominate. Instead of filling a gap, it created confusion. When Ford finally killed the Edsel in 1960, the company quietly shifted focus to a new project. That project would become the Ford Mustang, a car that learned from the Edsel's mistakes and gave buyers exactly what they wanted: style, speed, and affordability. The Mustang became a massive success and helped Ford rebuild its reputation. The Edsel, however, lived on in history, not as a car of the future but as a cautionary tale. Business schools studied it, comedians mocked it, collectors eventually embraced it as a piece of automotive history, not for its success but for its spectacular failure. Even today, the word Edsel is often used as shorthand for a flop, and that's the lasting legacy. A $350 million lesson that size, money, and power cannot guarantee success. The Edsel nearly destroyed Ford. It drained resources, shattered confidence, and left scars across the company. But it also forced Ford to listen, to adapt, and to understand its customers better. Without the pain of the Edsel, perhaps the glory of the Mustang would never have been possible. Sometimes, failure writes the future more powerfully than success ever could.